Okay, I would like to talk about the communication feedback loop. What you're looking at right here is what we started to go over in class. And you can see it's very basic. We have, on the left, we have a sender, and on the right, we have a receiver. And we have a circle in the middle. Now, the sender has a goal, okay? Whenever you communicate, you have a goal. What are you trying to accomplish? You formulate a message, you try to get it across to the recipient. Hopefully they take it as intended and they give you the feedback that you were hoping for. Now, communication doesn't exist in a vacuum. When I decide to communicate, it's generally because I want something. I have a goal in mind and I want the person I'm communicating with to satisfy that goal. That's why we call this the communication feedback loop. The sender of the communication initiates or opens the loop with the idea that the receiver will provide the desired feedback, thereby closing the loop. Now, this sounds simple, but it's more subtle than it looks. And if you can grasp these nuances, you will become a more effective communicator. We're going to take a look at this, but before we do, I want you to keep this in mind as we look at it. How would this apply to the subject matter we're going to be looking at, which is crime and media? So let's move on. If a sender wants to obtain a certain result, a goal from the receiver, he must first formulate the basic message. But that's just the beginning, okay? The sender needs to understand his audience and filter the message accordingly. If you don't understand your audience, then you're not going to be an effective communicator. So the sender should filter the content of his message based on his understanding of the audience's knowledge, experience, education, and so forth. Now, this is content filtering, okay? As I explained in class, when I was a tax lawyer, I might have the same goal, essentially the same message, but my message is going to be tailored differently depending on my audience. If I'm speaking to retirees who are looking to avoid being taxed as New York State residents, my message is going to be one way. But if I'm speaking to the accountants and CPAs who handle their taxes, then my message is going to be different. So that's content filtration. The sender should also filter his approach based on his understanding of his audience's mood and expectations. This means overall tone, stance, and so forth. You have to ask questions like, is the audience hostile or is it receptive? Are there cultural considerations? The sender should also filter his rhetoric in the same way. In other words, the sender should use the appropriate language and style of argument most likely to connect with his audience. Last but not least, now we're moving away from filtration, okay? Once we've composed our message and we've filtered it, based on our understanding of our audience, then we need to choose the appropriate medium to encode the message. Okay, and when I put this on the board the other day, we talked about oral presentation, telephone, voicemail, text, email, a letter, video production. These are all different media in which you could encode this message. And remember Marshall McLuhan, who said, "The medium is the message." Choosing the wrong medium can trivialize, or on the flip side, it can overemphasize the importance of the message, or cause the receiver to feel slighted. If you've ever been dumped by text, then you get the picture. So, here we are back at our communications feedback loop. Same place that we started before. Sender, receiver. Now let's put in some of these filters. Okay, so we're going to, here we are. We're the sender, and we've got our goal. So we are formulating our basic message. Okay, so basic message right here, and then we start to impose these filters as we compose our message. We tailor it to our audience, who here is the receiver. Okay, so we start to think about, well, based on our audience, filter. What type of content should we deliver to this audience? Okay, what type of approach should we use for this audience? What type of rhetoric should we use for this audience? Okay, and then we have to encode our message, our filtered message, into some type of medium. Okay, so there's our medium right there, our choice of medium. And here, as I said, it could be oral presentation. Like right now. Okay, I'm encoding my message about the communication feedback loop into this format because it's based on my understanding of you as an audience. It's an effective way for me to reach you. I can post this into the course, and you can look at it and look at it again and again and scroll back and forth through it, and it should help you understand it. It's probably the most effective way for me to communicate this message. So that's where we're at right there. I've formulated a basic message based on my goals. I've filtered that message, and I've chosen medium. So it goes over here to the other side, to the receiver, and hopefully my audience will. So here, as the message, as the message transits from here to here, the receiver has got filters of his own. So he's going to be filtering the message as it comes in, and that's going to color how it's received. Is my approach appropriate for that audience? Is my rhetoric appropriate for that audience? Is my choice of medium appropriate for that audience? And then hopefully they will respond in kind and formulate a message. The exact same thing. The receiver has now become the sender, and the sender has now become the receiver. So in formulating the feedback message, the receiver is going to impose filters of his own. Is going to choose some type of medium into which to encode that message, and then it's going to go over here to the original sender, who is also going to have filters on the receiving end. So hopefully, as a result of all that, there will be clear communication, where everybody is, tailoring their messages appropriately to that audience. Respond as I hoped. Now, the receiver has his own set of filters, which basically analyzes the sender's choices. The receiver may also bring his own set of prejudices to the table. The receiver digests this content, and in the context that we've created, and formulates a reply. In other words, feedback in the same fashion. So the receiver has now become the sender, and the sender has become the receiver. Now, I'm discussing this model for two reasons. First, This model can be applied in many contexts, and understanding it will help you become a more efficient communicator. This is true whether you are writing a business letter, giving a presentation, creating a resume, cover letter, negotiating a deal, and the list goes on. But number two, specifically, I want to discuss this model in the context of our subject matter, which is crime and media. Consider this communication model in light of the news coverage of a typical mass murder. For instance, the Colorado theater shootings. As the sender of the message here being news coverage, the news media is faced with the same decisions I just outlined. To recap, content filtration. Okay, what should they put on the air and what shouldn't they? Approach and tone. What is the proper stance for reporting on this type of tragedy? Rhetoric, the language, the use of visuals and footage. These are all decisions that need to be made. And last but not least, choice of medium. As Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And certain types of media bring a lot more to the table. In other words, they make the content of the message more exciting, more vibrant, more accessible. For instance, 20 years ago, had there been, some type of tragedy, let's go back even further, 30 years ago, the news would be reported, by radio, and newspaper and maybe news magazines. There might be some relatively dry coverage on the evening news. And that would be the extent of it. Whereas today, it's everywhere, and it's very accessible, and it's very visual. And in the quest for ratings, because we have to ask ourselves, what is the goal of the sender? If the sender is the news media, what is their goal? I mean, you can say, sure, the goal is to provide us, the viewer, with information, but ultimately, the goal is ratings. And in the race for ratings, the quest for ratings, the media seems to be kind of morally at sea. Some of the decisions that they make as to what to show and how to show it seem a bit questionable. And as we go forth into the subject matter, we'll see that some experts have questioned this as well. So the question is whether the media is making responsible decisions in light of its audience. And more importantly, what kind of feedback should we expect from this audience in light of these poor decisions? Where we're going with this is we're going to be looking at whether or not media coverage of these types of crimes leads to copycats. So, that concludes this presentation. Thanks.